Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, it helps us out so much, and it really does take you only 5 seconds. I know I say it every week, but it doesn't become less important on a weekly basis. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It really does mean a lot to us. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, that just helps us out even more. And again, thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going not bad at all, Mark. I'm doing alright. How you doing?
Not bad at all. Lewis, right to the chase. How's Last of Us Part 2 going?
It's gone, Mark. I have finished The Last of Us Part 2. I managed to roll credits on Saturday night, I think it was, with a final little push of a few hours. I thought it was going to take me a bit longer than it did in the kind of final hurdle. I remember saying last week I sounded a bit daft for saying that the latter half felt like it was going to be shorter than the first half, but I sort of think that is true because you get so much story packed into the last few hours, you know, that it rattles through quickly.
I'm slightly feeling that as well, I have to admit. Just so the listeners know, I'm also very close to the end, as we have just discussed off air. There will be no spoilers here, though. No spoilers here. But I am also very close to the end. And I would kind of agree that the second half of the game did feel, for some reason, shorter than the first half of the game. Maybe it is, but it shouldn't really be in my head anyway.
So yeah, Mark, I've now finished the game. I have seen how it all plays out and how this story ends. And also to think about how I've basically played through both games and the DLC for the first game within a couple of weeks means it's been like an extremely intense and emotional
Oh yeah, man, wow, I kind of forgot about that. Jesus.
It's been pretty heavy going, but it's good to get some closure. That's as much as I'm going to say. Like, that doesn't give anything away, but the promise of the story that is set up in the first part of the game that we spoke about a fair bit last week, everything that is set up there continues in such a dramatic, such a powerfully told way throughout the rest of the game, and it's told not just in those big story cutscenes, the big moments that we all expect, particularly in a game like this, but in those amazing quiet moments that we talked a little bit about last week, that just the little exchanges between characters, those kind of more environmental storytelling elements, and also one of the things that I find the most profound about this game being the structure and the way that Naughty Dog have gone about telling the story, you know, how they physically put it together and in what order things are told to you and how things are revealed to you at different points. I think that side of it elevates it as a piece of storytelling within games above pretty much anything else. It has so much connection and you can see so much inspiration in it from the original game to all these other games, the most obvious one being God of War from the last few years. There's such an interesting kind of parallel between those games, but I don't think God of War told its story in as interesting a way as this game tells its story.
Wow, that is certainly a big claim. I know that I'm not totally finished it yet, but I have done 90% of the game from what you are telling me. And I must admit, I think the way that this story is told, the way that it's so difficult to speak about it without spoiling it, but the way that everything about the game is so incredibly beautifully interwoven in such a complex way, but in actual fact told in a kind of a very straightforward manner as well. It's quite frankly incredible. It is absolutely incredible as a piece of storytelling in a video game. I think that there are few examples of anything that have done it quite this well. And on the subject of spoilers, I think that next week, as our topic of the week, we will do a quote-unquote spoiler cast for The Last of Us, where we will talk about it in a spoilery manner and we will talk about it in detail in terms of the story and whatever. So if you've not quite finished it yet, you've got a whole other week until we talk about that, or you can just come back to the conversation, or if you don't care about spoilers, then just listen anyway. But I would highly recommend that you don't actually, and that you just play the game first and then come back to the conversation that we have, because it is remarkable and quite frankly something that I very much want to continue talking about. And the fact that you told me earlier on, just before we started recording this podcast, that I have very little time left with the game actually made me initially quite sad, which doesn't really happen with me with video games quite a lot. Normally when I finish a video game, I'm like, yeah, I've finished it, that was great or whatever, but this feels a bit like, oh, it's over. you know?
It can be really tough.
Which is an interesting feeling, I've got to admit, because it's not one that I experience very often with the video games.
No, it is a feeling that you get sometimes with a game, and particularly a game that's this, heavy thematically, that it's this punishing and this stressful to play. It is odd to have that reaction, but I had the same reaction, because I think it is because the characters in the world are so richly drawn that it feels like, again, particularly that I've played both games back to back, I am so invested in what is happening to them that to know that it comes to an end, or, from where you are, that it's coming to an end, it's a funny thing to process. So I'm really interested to know what you think of effectively the last hour or so of the game and how it all wraps up. So we'll obviously be having conversations probably later tonight as soon as you finished.
Absolutely, it is definitely going to happen without a shadow of a doubt. But for everyone else, we shall refrain until next week.
Exactly.
Now, Lewis, it is time for the news. Alright, news item number 1. Microsoft have apparently expressed interest in acquiring Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment. This according to The Information, which is a publication I had never heard of before, but is apparently very well respected. So, there you go. Although the article itself is actually behind a paywall, so we are currently sourcing a Eurogamer article, but you can find links to both over in the show notes over at PlayersToo.com. So, you may remember a couple of weeks ago that AT&T, who own Warner Brothers effectively, announced that they were looking to sell their gaming division for around $4 billion was the price tag on this. And initially, the interested parties included Take-Two, EA, and Activision Blizzard, who are basically the 3 biggest publishers in video games. But still, $4 billion is a hell of a lot to them. I think that the biggest of these 3 companies is Activision Blizzard, and I just quickly looked up their revenue, and it was around $6 billion for the last financial year. Yeah. So that is a huge amount to them. However, Microsoft operate on a slightly different scale, I would say, than these companies, which makes this quite interesting indeed. Because the last time we spoke about this, we were talking about the fact that WB could license out their IP to multiple different publishers, kind of similarly to how Marvel/Disney handle their IP. However, because of the deep pockets of Microsoft, they could easily afford this $4 billion, no problem, and just buy all the IP or the rights to the IP in video games outright. And that would be a massive, massive deal for Xbox if they were all exclusive games, because these include the Lord of the Rings games, Harry Potter games, Batman games, and other characters in the DC universe, all the Lego games, and the Mortal Kombat games. And they include studios Rocksteady, Monolith, NetherRealm, and WB Montreal, all of whom are pretty top-tier studios. And I honestly think that would be absolutely massive for Xbox. It would be a fucking game changer, Lewis. And once again, pun fully intended.
It would be, yeah. It would be an absolutely colossal deal. And like you say, I mean, they're kind of one of the only companies that can afford it comfortably, that can even afford to take a risk on it. Because any of those other major publishers, they can spend the money, sure, but if those assets don't pay off, then they're in big trouble. And it's, AT&T are talking about selling this part of their business to clear debt as it is, so they obviously aren't totally confident that they can make $4 billion worth of money out of those franchises, so that's why they're looking to sell. So interesting, really interesting if Microsoft was to swoop in and do this. Not good for PlayStation gamers one bit, I've got to say. No,
not at all. I mean, and as to PlayStation gamers, Liz, I think that this would nearly force me to buy an Xbox. I'm not going to lie to you, as well as a PlayStation, not instead of. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if a new Batman game comes out or a new Mortal Kombat game comes out, I'm not playing that. That's not happening. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that would be massive. I think that would genuinely be absolutely massive.
For me, it's Mortal Kombat in particular. As much as I'm a fan of the Batman games, particularly the Arkham series itself, for me, like, not having Mortal Kombat available on PlayStation just feels like anathema. It's been there forever. It's sort of part of our PlayStation history, and I in particular. Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a good move for any of these studios to end up with console exclusivity, particularly if Xbox doesn't sell as well as PlayStation again in the next generation.
I mean, the reality is that they're not going to have a choice in
well,
this.
Exactly. There may be interesting discussions and tensions within all that, but like you say, if the money men decide and someone higher up the chain of the publisher publishers decide that this is what's going to happen, then yeah, that's what's going to happen. And that could mean, yeah, if you're a diehard PlayStation only player, or you're going to pick PS5 over the Series X, you might be about to lose access to some major exclusives, particularly whatever the hell Rocksteady are working on, if it is the Suicide Squad game and the Gotham Knights game that we were discussing just last week as well. So huge. I mean, every which way you cut this, that Harry Potter RPG that we were talking about just last week, that would end up in that place. So a lot of major games could end up being Xbox exclusives.
Yeah, even the Lego games as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know that for like hardcore gamers, that's nothing to anyone, you know.
Yeah,
but they sell like absolutely hotcakes to kids and to younger gamers. Do you know what I mean? Even if you have a kid and you want to buy them a game, though, a lot of those Lego games are actually critically really well received.
Oh yeah,
so
absolutely,
they would probably be quite high on the list to buy a kid. I think that would be like almost unbelievable if Xbox did buy the WB Interactive IP, because that would change everything. That would be huge.
Do you think it's going to happen then? Is your gut saying yeah?
My gut says it makes sense for them. Yeah. My gut says that makes a lot of sense for Microsoft, and if this is true, and I have no reason to doubt it, then they would be in the best position to make that purchase as well, because I don't really think that any of the others could afford to pay $4 billion if it does turn out to be $4 billion outright, and that they would all probably be interested in buying pieces of the IP or to license the IP to use. Like, so maybe Activision want Batman and EA want Mortal Kombat. Do you know what I mean? They'll split it out that way. Whereas Microsoft could, and keeping in mind that this is a company, as the Eurogame article points out, that spent $2 billion on Minecraft, could easily come in and just swoop and take the lot. And I'm sure that if they made AT&T an offer of around about $4 billion, and AT&T are looking to clear debt, that is nothing to be sniffed at, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's hard to see why AT&T would refuse an offer that was close to that, and which did take it all from them in one fell swoop. You know, there's a lot less that has to be done for them in that scenario. You know, they don't have to look for individual contracts and stuff like that. They just sell it wholesale to a company that they know are going to handle it, and that's that. So
yeah, and know that we'll handle it with care as well. They are a respected gaming company. Do you know what I mean? It's, well, we could probably say that a lot of the other companies that were interested have a lot of bad history with microtransactions and poor monetizations and tarnishing people's IP. Cough, cough, Star Wars.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
I think that AT&T would be quite happy if Microsoft came in and took the lot. If I'm totally honest.
Definitely.
Well, like, how do you feel about it? Would you feel as though that's quite likely, or
I mean, kind of the same boat as you, I think, where it feels like it makes sense. It does feel like Microsoft are in a better position than those other companies to do it. They need IP, they need big exclusives to combat the PlayStation. To put it in as blunt terms as this, they need a Batman to combat PlayStation Spider-Man, you know? Not just that that's the only major PlayStation game, and obviously those two things don't line up exactly, but that's a huge tentpole thing for PlayStation to have, that they have a Marvel character of that ilk exclusively on their console. And if Xbox can take Batman and do the same thing, then that will be huge. But it's fascinating. It's a really interesting moment for a hell of a lot of games that we like, you know?
Yeah, really interesting. Very, very, very interesting to see how this all pans out. Alright, news item number 2. Sticking with Xbox list, they have announced their games showcase for July, and it will be on the 23rd. So this is supposed to be the showcase of Xbox's first party games. We spoke a little bit about this last week, in that we didn't really know massively what Xbox were going to be showing off here. But I mean, you'll be getting Halo almost undoubtedly, hopefully some gameplay. I mean, really hopefully some gameplay.
It's got to be.
Things like Hellblade 2, I'm sure will make an appearance, and all the things that we already know about, I'm sure will make an appearance. But personally, I am really hoping for, as we said last week, new IP. I'm really looking forward to finding out what these studios are going to be doing that Xbox purchased, you know?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the most interesting things. And we know some of the answers to those things. You know, we know Obsidian are making Grounded, and that's coming up soon. And
but that's only a small little project, man. I want to know what the next big one is from them, you know? I want to know what that is.
I mean, presumably that could well be Outer Worlds too, you know? It probably at this stage
I really hope that it is.
Yeah.
I really hope that it is. Oh, God.
Probably just a teaser at this point. And I was thinking a little bit about this around what we might expect from Xbox. And other than Halo, a lot of their, Gears, I suppose, is where I'm actually going with that. You know, that had a release in the not too distant past, and then Gears Tactics after that. You know, I don't think a lot of their major franchises are going to be in a position, Ori and the Will of the Wisps as well, to announce something new right now. You know, it feels like a lot of their big first party games have kind of had installments in the pretty recent past. So we could be about to just see a whole raft of entirely new stuff, including, as you say, from the recently bought studios.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Obviously, the big question marks remain around Fable, I suppose, would be incredible to see, I think, for a lot of people. And maybe what Rare is doing. Obviously, Rare did Sea of Thieves, and again, also the not too distant past, I suppose, and as a service game. But Perfect Dark had been a bit of a rumour for a while.
Yep.
And then someone on our Twitter actually mentioned Banjo-Kazooie as well, and how that had a bit of a revival being a Smash character, basically.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, God, you know what? That would be really great from an Xbox perspective, because that would be sort of counteracting, if you like. And I know that these companies don't really think on those terms, but it would sort of be counteracting the Ratchet and Clank of PlayStation, you know?
Totally, yeah. I know what you're saying, like they don't actively think about it in that sense, but you do have to, just from the business perspective, Xbox need to make sure that they hit all the same bases that PlayStation hit, and vice versa, because you want to get a family audience in, and you want to get hardcore gamers in and all that stuff. So yeah, Banjo makes total sense. Yeah,
that'd be incredible to see. However, Venture Beats Jeff Grubb has suggested that Xbox are, quotes, going to hold things back for later this year, just like Sony did. Now, firstly, I'm not sure that I agree that Sony held anything back here, because in their presentation it felt very much like balls to the wall, and they brought out all their heavy hitters, or anything that we could reasonably have expected to see. Anyone who was expecting to see God of War or Uncharted or anything like that, that was kind of a pipe dream, to be totally honest. But secondly, I really don't think that Xbox are, not that they're not in a position to be holding things back, but I think that would be a really, really bad move. Like, all eyes are on you again right now. You want to excite people, do you know what I mean? I don't think it's unfair to say that for fans and for critics, the last presentation did fall a bit flat, and it was largely due to lack of gameplay. You really can't afford to be doing that again and again and again going into next generation. So go out there, throw absolutely everything that you've got at it, and get people fucking excited for your next console. Get people absolutely frothing at the mouth to get your new IP, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. I cannot see a good argument for holding anything back, really. Exactly as you illustrated there. The one thing that you could maybe argue that Sony held back from was showing a lot of gameplay from those major tentpole games. I know there's a lot of gameplay in the showcase overall, but you know, we didn't really get much from Horizon or Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's what they mean. That would be interesting, because you can see a world where Microsoft don't show a lot of gameplay for some of their key games. I think they have to show Halo gameplay. I think they really have to show Halo gameplay.
Absolutely. Like, a logo is good enough for, like, if Fable was going to be at this showcase, which by all accounts it's probably not going to be, but if it was, that logo is enough for that game. But for Halo, they absolutely have to have gameplay for that. They must.
Exactly. But I think as well, if they do hold back on gameplay, if that is what is being suggested that they'll hold back on until later in the year, they've already had one showcase that was lacking in gameplay and annoyed everyone. So I wonder if they can really afford to do that, you know? Like you say, with certain games like a Fable tease or whatever, that's totally fine. But I think that they really need to show us what the Series X can do in this showcase. You know, they really need to show what that console is capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was also a kind of second part to this news item as well. I suppose this is news item 2.5 if you want. And this comes from Brad Sams at Thurot, and I think that's how you pronounce it. I've never really known how you pronounce this website. However, he has been previously right about a lot of rumours, speculation, predictions, leaks around Xbox. And in actual fact, if you are an Xbox fan out there, you should really follow him, because he is very good. I mean, he has written an article called The Latest on Lockhart, which, for those of you that don't know, Lockhart was apparently the code name for Xbox's cheaper next-gen console. And to be honest with you, it's a bit of, well, it's like one of the worst-kept secrets in video games, to be honest, isn't it? So Brad Sam said a couple of interesting things here. Firstly, that Lockhart was initially supposed to be announced in June, which is almost certainly E3. But the reports seem to be now suggesting that it will be announced in August, which feels a little late. I don't know about you, but that feels a little late. You first announced the Xbox Series X in December last year, and then you're waiting all the way to August, just maybe a few months out from when they're both going to be releasing. That to me seems a bit strange. Secondly, Sams said that Lockhart was initially going to release after Anaconda, which is now the Xbox Series X. That was the codename for the Xbox Series X. Initially, it was supposed to release in August, and then Lockhart was supposed to release in mid-October, which to me seems all sorts of wrong, because from the get-go, from that first announcement at the Game Awards in December, they've always been talking about holidays 2020, and for Americans, that is basically between Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah.
So to me, that that seems a bit off, to be completely honest with you. What is more interesting about that statement is that consoles were going to have a staggered launch, which again to me seems very, very odd. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Pretty odd. I don't totally know why you would go about doing that as your strategy. I don't think Xbox wants to split its space too much right at the beginning as well. To contrast, this isn't... I guess we've all been imagining we're going to end up in the position that we've been in this generation, where you have the One S and the One X, but they didn't do that right from the off. You know, you had your base unit for a while first, and then they introduced those SKUs. So to launch the console with two SKUs and to launch them separately, particularly if it really was supposed to be months apart, that seems a little odd. And just on the announcement part, I really don't know why, if Lockhart is real, why it's not in the July showcase. In much the same way that the PS5 was finally shown off there, in that conference with here's the SKUs, here's how it's all going to pan out, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that would be really cool. I mean, ultimately it looks as if they're focusing on the games here, which is fair enough, but it just seems like quite a long time, you know?
Definitely,
it just seems like quite a long time. And the last piece of information in this was a comment that he made around the price. Sam said this:
"But the big unknown will be the pricing. If the consoles were only $50 difference, even though consumers are typically very price sensitive, the overhead of launching two consoles with that difference doesn't make much sense. The minimum price difference needs to be $100 or more to create enough of a gap to make the additional marketing and the cost of educating the consumer worthwhile."
Yeah, so this was interesting because we had been speculating, or I had been speculating certainly, that because we had two versions of the PS5 confirmed, that the price difference among them might not be that much. But there's no reason that principle shouldn't apply to PlayStation as well. In fact, it almost certainly will apply to PlayStation as well, which really makes me worry about the price of the PlayStation. It really does. Because PlayStation have all but come out and said, this is going to be expensive. Which makes me think that Lockhart could be as cheap as $400, which, I mean, what is that in pounds? Like 350 quid?
Yeah.
Which, for a brand spanking new console, is pretty bloody good. And the top of the range Series X will be $500. But I think that PlayStation are going to be an extra 50 quid on both of them, at least, honestly.
Yeah, that totally maps out with how I've been imagining it, to be honest.
But as well, a next-gen console for 400 quid, that is fabulous. That is fantastic value if that is what Xbox are going to deliver here.
Definitely. But I still think they have to prove why that should be bought over your current One X, though. You know, why is Lockhart the thing that you need?
I mean, yeah, Xbox, I still think, are making it very, 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 very easy for their consumer base to stay on the current generation of consoles, and fair play to them. I mean, they're being very, very consumer focused with that, but at some point I'm going to need them to sell me the next generation of console if they want me to buy it. Alright, news item number 3, and sticking with the next gen list, all these news items nicely fit together, I like it. The first official recommended price for a next-gen game has been announced, and I think it's probably pretty depressing reading for a lot of people. The game is NBA 2K21, and the recommended price for it is $69.99 US dollars, so $70 US dollars, and $64.99 Great British pounds, so 65 quid. For contrast, the PS4 and Xbox One recommendation price is $60 and £60, which is quite interesting because that is very expensive here for a game. So this subsequently upset quite a lot of people online. However, the prices for games have remained exactly the same for 2 generations now. Here they've been about 50 quid, in America they've been about $60, while the game development cost has increased apparently by between 200 and 300%. Now, that has been offset a bit, I'm sure, by the fact that way more games are sold now than were sold 2 generations ago. However, this increase actually only constitutes a 17% rise, whereas in other media there's been an increase of 39% in cinema ticket sales, and there's been a 100% increase in a Netflix subscription, and TV packages have apparently increased by over 100% as well. All those figures will be American. This is all taken from a gamesindustry.biz article, which you can find over at PlayersToo.com as well. Also, if you think about the fact that the games have stayed the same for 12 years now or something like that, basically, maybe longer than that, adjusting for inflation, video games now are probably cheaper than they have ever been, or very cheap anyway in the history of video games, and yet dev costs are absolutely continuing to skyrocket. Now, I'm not saying for one moment that the increased cost here is going to offset that in any capacity, but it will help a little bit, and I do genuinely believe that things like this are correlated to predatory microtransactions and pay-to-win mechanics and crunch and different ways to monetize the games that aren't just the initial money that you hand over the counter. and again could lead to things like devs not being able to pay their employees enough to keep their talent in comparison to other industries where a programmer could easily make more money, you know. And I don't think that is necessarily a straight correlation, but there is a very clear problem here to me and to a lot of people, because it has been long suggested that another video games crash is probably coming in the near future because this model is not sustainable. And unless we change this model, unless we change the way that games are made, unless we change the way that games are monetized, something's going to break here. Do you know what I mean? Something's going to fall apart at some point. Because the problem is right now, is the games that we want to play cannot be made for the amount of money that we want to pay for them. And that's a real fucking problem.
It definitely is a big problem. That question of value versus cost is such an interesting one. And like you kind of illustrated, there's a huge kind of matrix of things connected into this. You know, we know that big publishers make an absolute ton of money out of them. So there's obviously things about their business practices not feeding money back down into development costs. So ergo, people don't get paid enough, they don't stay, etc., etc. But one way of solving that is to put prices up. I don't want to see prices go up. I can't imagine you want to see prices go up either. But
I don't want to see prices go up. I don't want to see prices go up. No one wants to see prices go up. However, I think that it's perfectly reasonable that the prices are going up.
Yeah. It feels fairly inevitable, and I hope that there's some balance within all that, because obviously some games do take a hell of a lot of money to produce, but some games take considerably less money, and most games of a certain level are all charged at the same kind of price. And you know, does enough of the money that is generated by huge games with huge sales at the AAA level, does that filter down to smaller studios? Do they have to charge more for indie games than we kind of want to pay, and ergo kind of affect how much money those developers are making? It's a huge question, but I think we've basically reached the point, haven't we? Like, this is going to happen now. If companies are coming out and saying this is what it's going to cost on the next gen, everyone's going to follow suit.
Oh yeah, and again, there's a separate games industry.biz article talking about how other developers are also considering what prices their games are going to be effectively, and quite frankly, how much people are willing to pay for them, because I really think that is the problem, because in reality, they probably want to put the prices up by quite a lot more than what they are. And in terms of the man hours put into creating like huge AAA games, it's really probably not unreasonable. But at the same time, people almost certainly will not be willing to spend £90, £100, $100 even on a video game. They're just not. They're not going to be willing to do that. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot at that point, you know? Well,
totally. And it also changes the nature of buying within games. So you might still pay £100 for a game, but you won't buy any other games for that quarter, probably, you know?
Well, a lot of people won't, certainly. No, absolutely not. I mean, this is already an expensive hobby as it is. Totally, do you know what I mean? It is an expensive hobby, no doubt about it. But increasing games by that level will hamper the growth of the industry, which has grown enormously over the last few years. But I really think that increasing it too much will really hurt it. But
you have to bring people
at the same
along
time
gradually.
This is just inevitable. It just is. And quite frankly, I think that we've been fortunate to have as low prices for games for so long. And like I said, in terms of inflation and whatever, I really think that this is probably the time where video games are amongst the cheapest that they have ever been.
Totally. As we introduce things like subscription models and discless consoles, which means you have to buy off online platforms and all of these things start to come together in the question of price and what we think of as valuable. So I think a lot about how games are priced and how much we pay for them is going to change over the next few years because of so many different facets, not just greedy publishers deciding to charge more, you know?
Yeah, but exactly, the whole game is changing on top of that as well.
Exactly.
Alright, and news item number 4. PlayStation have announced the first details of their Indies initiative and 9 indie games that will debut alongside it. This was announced by Shuhei Yoshida on the PlayStation blog, who made this statement.
I'm pleased to formally announce the PlayStation Indies initiative. With PlayStation Indies, we hope to spotlight and support the best of the best indie games being published on PlayStation and the entire indie community as a whole. Our goal is to make PlayStation the best place to develop, find and play great indie games. The indie community is increasingly important for the future of the video games industry, as AAA game development has grown so financially demanding that big companies are finding it harder to take risks to invest in new concepts that may or may not work. We trust indie developers with strong vision will continue to bring ideas that have never been tried before, creating whole new genres of games and advancing the art and meaning of video games. PlayStation has always embraced games with completely new concepts, like Parappa the Rapper, Katamari Damacy, Little Big Planet and Journey, and we look forward to seeing what surprising new ideas will come next.
Interesting as well, on the back of our previous conversation, that Shuhei Yoshida has also said that AAA game development has grown so financially demanding that they basically can no longer innovate. However, Yoshida actually stepped down as president of SIE Studios worldwide to become the head of this new initiative, which was kind of seen as a bit of a step down for him, to be totally honest. And honestly, it probably was, but still, it's really, really cool to have someone of such high stature in the video games industry in charge of indie games for such a major publisher like PlayStation, you know?
Definitely, yeah.
Which is really, really cool. And as that statement said, it's all about highlighting and supporting great indie games and getting them onto PlayStation effectively, which is awesome. Like, we love here to see indie games succeed and do well, and the more support they get from publishers like this, the better. Also, I think this is a fantastic response from PlayStation, who only a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year, at the Tokyo Game Showcase, were actually throwing a bit of shade because they weren't giving enough attention to indie games, or certainly not as much as they used to be during the PlayStation 3 era, seemed to be, where it was kind of at its height. But I really do. I think this is absolutely great, and the more big publishers that are supporting indie titles, the better. I mean, EA is actually quite good for this with their EA Originals and things like that.
Exactly,
so, yeah, super good. So, the 9 games that were announced alongside this, not all of these are new, but the first one was Worms Rumble, which is a real-time version of Worms, which looked absolutely frenetic and fucking wild. I thought it looked really, really good. I think that would make a fantastic free-to-play game,
definitely,
honestly,
yeah,
and I'm sure it probably is a free-to-play game. I don't know that much about it, but it looked really, really fun. Next up was Haven, which was described as a chill cooperative adventure, which does look quite interesting, but you play as a couple in a kind of journey-style game, which I think would be quite odd to play with someone over the internet, personally. But yeah, I thought that looked quite interesting. Then there was Carto, which was, again, quite an interesting looking puzzle game that involved you actually physically taking and moving sections of your map around to create new areas which solved puzzles effectively. It was very difficult to describe. I would highly recommend you watch the trailer. After that was Recompile, which is a, quotes, hacking-themed 3D platformer, which I thought looked quite cool, but I'm always slightly wary of 3D platformers, if I'm totally honest with you. I think that they can always be quite bad. Some can be great, but I think that there are pitfalls there, and particularly when it's been taken on by an indie studio. But that one did look quite good. Next up was Where the Heart Is. This was a narrative-based adventure game, quotes, between truth and fiction. This seems to be going for a very much Life is Strange vibe, and was sort of a magical realism sort of story being told there. Next up after that was Marquette. This was an Annapurna game. This has been shown off a few times before, actually. And it's a puzzle game about recursive worlds within one another. And it just looks fantastic. It's such an incredibly mad idea. And it looks really, really well executed, actually.
Yep, I've heard loads of good things about this game recently. It looks definitely up my street in terms of kind of ingenious puzzle solving. I can't wait to get a shot of that.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Next up was FIST. This is an acronym for Forged in Shadow Torch, which sees you take control of a badass rabbit with a mechanised suit. Now that sounds terrible, but honestly, it looked great. It looked absolutely great. It's an action platformer, and it had really high-paced action in it. It looked fantastic, and the amount of polish on it, as you were just saying before the show, was really, really impressive for an indie title.
Stunning, visually stunning, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. That is never something that I've seen before anyway. I don't know if that had been announced before, but that looked definitely something to keep your eye on. Next up was Heavenly Bodies. This was a physics-based puzzle game which basically saw you maintaining a spaceship, which looked quite weird. This one definitely wasn't up my street, honestly, but if you're into physics-based puzzle games, go and check it out. And finally it was Creaks, which was a creepy as hell looking hand-drawn game which was giving me major Braid vibes, and if it's giving me Braid vibes, Lewis, that is a good thing. Honestly, I thought this looked absolutely great. The hand-drawn style was absolutely stunning. Definitely, it was quite creepy looking, I've got to say. Puzzle games, right up my street. It's ticking all the boxes, man.
Yeah, another one that just, particularly its art style, was just really eye-catching. Like you said, I sort of thought of Braid while it was playing as well. Like, there looks like some interesting mechanics going on in the game as well, so definitely one to keep an eye out for. I think that's out this summer as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Worth pointing out as well that most of these games are coming to PS4 and PS5, but not all of them. Some of them are just coming to PS4 so far as I'm aware, but ultimately will probably find themselves on PS5 eventually, I'm sure. Alright, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout out number 1. There have been around 30 minutes of Assassin's Creed Valhalla gameplay footage leaked. Now, neither of us have actually watched this because neither of us want the game spoiled for us. So this is sort of a for your information / PSA, in that if you do want to see the gameplay, then there's 30 minutes out there for you and you should go and look it up. Or if you don't want to see the gameplay, there are spoilers out there for you and stay away. Shout out number 2. The House of Lords, Lewis, here in the UK have urged the UK government to immediately bring loot boxes into the remit of the gambling legislation and regulations. Now, this is quite a big deal because this puts a lot of pressure on our government to do something about this. A new report from the House's Select Committee has made 66 recommendations to better protect consumers from gambling-related harm. The committee expects the government and regulators to make changes now, as many of the changes do not require legislation, which is also a big deal because legislation is slow to get through.
Yep.
This is all kind of part of a wider review of the UK Gambling Act, which is long in need of some fucking attention, quite frankly. But what the committee is saying is, like, we shouldn't be waiting on this. We should be actioning this right now, which is really, really good to hear. And as I said, puts a lot of pressure on our government.
Yeah, big stuff this, Mark. To have the House of Lords involved, I mean, it means that this issue is happening right in the heart of our government. It means, as you said, like, pressure is going to come to bear on the government to do something. And the fact that they've highlighted that legislation isn't actually required to get a lot of this stuff over the line, I don't know if that particularly pertains to loot boxes or the broader changes to the Gambling Act that are being discussed. But the fact that they're like, you can do this now, so let's get moving on it, means that maybe we'll start to see some changes, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Yeah, and I think as well, I know that other countries have put in place regulations to tackle loot boxes. However, the UK government being of a certain stature, we will say, which sounds wanky as hell, and the fact that the video games industry is so big and so prevalent here as well, means that the wider video games industry might have to take a bit more notice now that the UK government has decided to regulate against loot boxes versus some of these other countries. So this actually is like a big deal and could really make a big difference. Alright, shout out number 3. The Mafia remake has been delayed, Lewis, from August the 28th until September the 25th. They have made this statement on Twitter.
Mafia Definitive Edition will now release worldwide on September 25th. Though we'd originally planned to release the game 1 month earlier on August 28th, finalising everything in time for that launch date has become increasingly challenging due to the ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic, and the last thing we want to do is compromise the quality of the experience. From the beginning, this has been a passion project for us. Many of our developers helped create the original Mafia, and all of us are committed to crafting an updated experience worthy of that timeless classic. We appreciate your patience and understanding as we make Mafia Definitive Edition the very best it can be for all of our fans worldwide. All that said, we know you're anxious to see more. That's why we're thrilled to give you an extended look at Mafia Definitive Edition's gameplay in just 2 weeks on July 22nd. Be sure to follow @MafiaGame on Twitter to see a brand new 15-second teaser now, and visit mafiagame.com for more information about the entire Mafia trilogy. We want to express our heartfelt thanks to you for watching our narrative trailer, playing the definitive editions of Mafia 2 and 3, and supporting us as we continue building the definitive organised crime saga. We look forward to showing you more on July 22nd.
So there you go, quite a long statement there, but ultimately they announced this date during the coronavirus pandemic, which seems to be that they've either done that prematurely or something has went wrong, and I'm hoping that it is not the latter, because they've had to push this obviously because of complications around the development due to the coronavirus. But there is also a new trailer out there if anyone would like to watch it. Again, links in the show notes over at PlayersToo.com. And finally, shout out number 4. There are going to be 2 further showcases this week if anyone is interested. Firstly, the Ubisoft Forward is going to take place on Sunday. This will almost certainly include Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Watch Dogs Legion, Rainbow Six Quarantine, Hyperscape, and maybe Gods and Monsters, or whatever that's called now because it seems to have changed name. Maybe Beyond Good and Evil 2, and fingers crossed, Skull and Bones, maybe, Liz? Who knows? And secondly, there will be a Devolver Direct, which they have stolen straight from Nintendo in the most hilarious way, in a very Devolver Digital sort of way, where everything just looks like it's a Nintendo Direct, which is brilliant. I have no idea what's going to be part of that. I'm sure it will be absolutely wild because it's Devolver, and I'm fully on board for watching it.
It almost like doesn't matter what they show, it's more just like a good show to watch.
Yeah, right. It's the show itself is good enough, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so be sure to tune into them at the weekend, and almost without doubt we will be discussing them on next week's show. But for now, Lewis, it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is, are video games too long, Lewis? Are they too long? This is all kind of spun out of comments made by Shawn Layden, who's the former head of PlayStation, at the Game Live conference. And he was basically making these comments in a conversation where he was saying that the AAA model is, quotes, just not sustainable. So you can see that this already is tying back into what we were talking about earlier on with game prices and all that. So he was saying that he would welcome a return of the 12 to 15 hour AAA game. And I don't know what your thoughts on this are, actually, Lewis. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Mark, I have to say, in some ways, I agree with Shawn Layden on this. I think my high-level thing would be that I think it absolutely depends on individual games. I don't think any kind of blanket statement about games should be more this or that or the next thing are ever helpful and always lead to stupid internet debates. So generally speaking, I would say games should be as long as that game needs to be. But would I welcome more games that are under 20 hours? I think, basically I would welcome that. Yeah. Now, I'm sitting here as a man, Lewis, who would happily throw 90 hours into a JRPG. You know this of me. However, I think I basically agree. I think that there is definitely a market for... I actually think 12 hours is maybe a little bit short, but sort of... maybe 15 to 18, I would say. Like, maybe a little bit shorter than, like, God of War, which I think was, like, 23-ish. I think that there's probably quite a strong market for that. And then Shawn Layden's also making this comment because games that are that length, theoretically anyway, would cost less to make. Certainly in development time, it would cost less. And it would therefore be more profitable for the company, and therefore would be breaking the current AAA model that we have, which, as we kind of discussed, I don't think either of us believe that it is sustainable either, which is quite interesting. But I wonder how much of a market there is for a 12 or 15 hour game, AAA game, mind. So this is a full high production game. I wonder how much enthusiasm there would be for a 12 or 15 hour experience like that at full price. That's where I'm coming in. It's a tough question, Mark. Is there an appetite for that? I suspect not for the shorter range, the shorter end of that range, sorry, because people want bang for their buck, obviously. But I do think a lot of people quite often are paying a lot of money for games that they end up not getting the full value of, you know, either because they just don't get all the way through it, or because a big chunk of that game is side content that you don't have to do, and so you end up with... You just off air there, you mentioned God of War, and I was already thinking about it because that to me feels like a good length for a game, but there's probably about 10 hours or so of additional stuff that you could take on, you don't have to do, but you've paid for it. So, you know, there's interesting questions there about, does a game need all of the stuff that ends up making it so long, you know? To go back to what I was saying originally, like, it has to come down to what a game needs. So a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which is, you know, very long, by a lot of arguments, too long. Yeah, I mean, certainly that was a huge complaint about that, is that the story didn't move at a pace that a lot of people wanted it to, and in their opinions dragged on, basically. So yeah, that's a very common, well, semi-common anyway, argument for modern video games and the length of them. Yeah, certainly. Absolutely, yeah. But I just think, like, for me, that game, that's what I wanted from it. I wanted a big, expansive environment that I could explore and sink so much time into if I so chose. No, I mean, I'm 100% in the same boat, you know that. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But then other games, you just really don't need that. And certainly, we complained a little bit about how short Resident Evil 3 was when we both played it. But yes, I don't think I would want a game like that to be any longer than Resident Evil 2 Remake was, because that felt like it was so tight, that game. It just did everything it wanted to do within whatever that was, 15 hours or something. Yeah, well, the interesting part of that is that Resident Evil 3 probably wasn't actually that much shorter or shorter at all than Resident Evil 2, but you could do 2 playthroughs of Resident Evil 2 as different characters.
characters and experience the game differently.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
However, no, but the point definitely still stands. It definitely still stands. In that price range, particularly if we're now talking about charging people $70 or 65 quid for a game, a full price game, and you're telling them, well, this is only going to be 12 to 15 hours, then I think a lot of people are going to go, no. Particularly if that is just a story-focused game, that's just a narrative-driven single-player game that has no online content, that has no
replay
post-game content, no replay value, yes, certainly. I think that would be an extremely hard sell in the current climate. However, what I think that video games could maybe go back to, and this is a thing back in kind of cartridge games where different games cost different amounts of money. Some game that cost a huge amount of money, the cartridge would cost more to buy because there was more development time went into it, and then something that was relatively tight and relatively cheap to make cost less money. I think that we could really use a bit more, well, maybe not even structure, but I think we could just use a bit more diversity in what prices we charge for games. If a massive AAA game like The Last of Us Part 2, say, that we both clearly are absolutely in love with, cost 65 quid, and that's how much it had to be priced at to make the studio enough money for it to have been worth it, fine, no problem at all. Like, absolutely no problem at all from me. However, Resident Evil 3, as you brought up, I would have resented paying even full price by today's standards, so like 50 quid, even 40 quid for that, when in actual fact I think that game probably, in my head, like 35 quid, I think that game would have been received a hell of a lot better just because it cost less money. By doing that, it's almost setting expectations for it as well. It's basically saying that this isn't a colossal Last of Us or God of War or Red Dead Redemption sized game, or do you know what I mean, or doesn't have that level of polish or that level of production value behind it. It's a nice tight experience, and we can make enough money on it at £35, say, to make it worth it for us. I think that there maybe has to be a bit more diversity in how much games cost, and you get this a lot at the indie level, but not at the AAA level at all.
Yeah, it's almost like plateaus of cost that you get up to when the higher up the food chain of games you go. So
that is it. You hit that plateau of what you think people are actually willing to pay for it, not how much it quotes should cost.
Yeah,
you know?
Conversely, the other way around, like that Resident Evil or Capcom didn't feel like they ought to really reduce the price of Resident Evil 3 Remake given how much actual content there was. It's the relationship between price and game length is a really interesting one. And I mean, that conversation we had earlier about how much games cost and where that's going, these two things are going to move forward together in tandem, I'm sure. To stick specifically to like how long a game should be, and The Last of Us 2 is in part like related to this conversation because a lot of this has come up at the same time. I know Jason Schreier tweeted something along the lines of video games are too long, sort of specifically referencing The Last of Us Part 2. And to me, like, that feels like a game that is almost the perfect length. And I know other people might disagree, but it feels like it tells its story in just the time that it needs. If it went on a couple of hours longer, it might have started to feel like it was dragging or using its time wrongly, you know?
The point in The Last of Us 2 for me is that it didn't ever feel, there was no point to me that it felt as if it was wasting my time.
Exactly.
Whereas I think that people that were playing Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, could have had those feelings. Like, I can see where that jump in logic is, you know what I mean?
Absolutely,
whereas The Last of Us Part 2 does not feel that way to me.
That feels to me as well like the reaction to The Last of Us Part 2's length is it more about how it feels to play a game like that for that length of time, because it's no different really in length to something like God of War. It's probably slightly longer than...
Maybe slightly longer, yeah,
like slightly, a couple of hours longer, probably about 8 hours longer than Spider-Man was or something. It's a decent length. I would say my playtime was probably about 25 hours. For me, that covered about a week to 10 days of gameplay, playing a few hours a night. It was perfect. It was the perfect kind of length of a game for me because of the story it was trying to tell and how much time I wanted to spend in that world and how, you know, the character progression and all that happened within that time. It felt balanced. It felt like what it needed to be. What I don't need are games that are just trying to stuff extra things in to make them be of a length that then they can say, but this is the longest game ever, you know? That's partly why I fell away from the Assassin's Creed series after a while. Not so much the latter games, although obviously they're extremely long as well, but that kind of middle section of the Assassin's Creed franchise, the
Ubisoft bloat section,
kind of around the third game onwards, or Assassin's Creed 3 onwards, I mean, where it just felt like they were putting stuff in to make the game longer because it had to be longer so that they could charge you that much for it or talk about it in that kind of way. And that to me feels like when games are too long. It's just like when it's padding for no good reason, you know? Tell your story and absolutely have replay value and have stuff there that people can go and explore, but make it meaningful, you know?
Well, let me ask you a question then, and maybe you've actually just answered it with that last statement that you've made, but so what is the difference then between Ubisoft having loads and loads of side content and additional things that you can do within the game to, quotes, pad their game to make it of a certain length, and The Witcher doing basically the same thing, but that was never received that way? No one thinks about that as like too long a game or like padded or anything like that. It must be to do with the quality then, isn't it? It's to do with the quality of the content. It's not actually about quantity. It's about quality, always.
Yeah, like you say, it's always about that. Like, I think we've talked about this a wee bit before as well. Yeah, what The Witcher does with its side quests is it treats them as important stories in the way that it treats its main quest line, you know? Everything that you can do in The Witcher 3 is told with that same gravitas. None of it feels like this is just your wee fetch quest because it's a video game and you need a fetch quest. You know, it's everything is there for a reason. I should say though, I mean, I fell off The Witcher 3. I loved it. I played it for about 40 hours and then I stopped playing it. And that is partly because the length, not just because of the side stuff, but it kind of makes you do some of that side stuff in order to level up enough to take on the main quests. I just kind of hit a point where I was like, I've been playing this for what feels like weeks, and that's kind of me had my time with it. It was exactly the same with XCOM 2, which I bought and played a bit of and then just thought, this has gone on too long. Whereas I loved Chimera Squad, which was a much smaller game.
Much tighter experience, yeah,
and I think that move towards the Uncharted Lost Legacy style game, which is being held up a lot just now because, you know, Spider-Man Miles Morales has kind of been talked about in the same vein. We're probably going to see other games at that, I think what we're describing as like the £30 to £40 level that's about a 15-hour experience. I would love to see more games, more franchises in particular, use games like that to try things, and that's where your innovation can come, you know?
Of course, we literally just spoke about Shuhei Yoshida was saying that the financial weight of a AAA development kind of precludes some innovation, do you know what I mean? So yeah, maybe if studios can start doing, well, yeah, we've done The Last of Us Part 2 now, but maybe Naughty Dog can fall back now and do another left behind sized game, do you know what I mean? Make the cost way, way less in terms of development, make the cost way, way less in terms of what the consumer is going to purchase it for as well, and innovate and try something new. Do you know what I mean? I think that that's something that isn't done in DLC enough. Like, I think DLC could be a really, really great way to not just provide you more content, but provide you different content, you know what I mean? Try something, challenge you in a different way, and not just provide more of the same, you know? So I would like to see it done in DLC as well, even if it's paid DLC. Like, I have no problem paying for DLC if it's like a good amount of DLC. I know some people have issues with that, but yeah, for me, it's always about the game should be as long as it has to be and no longer. That's kind of the point. And it is always quality, not quantity at all. Like, I would happily pay full price for a 12-hour experience. I know a lot of people wouldn't, but I would happily do that if I know that that is going to be a fantastic 12 hours. Like, if that's going to be a fantastic 12-hour video game, no problem. Exactly. I have no problem playing full price with that whatsoever. But it's very... You hold the game to very high standards. I mean, you're playing with fire when you're doing that, do you know what I mean? If you're asking people to play full price for a game that is, by modern standards, deemed short, then you really have to hit the nail on the head. That is what I would say about that. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, well, I think we will call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast, it really, really helps us out. Again, I know I say it every week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. It's super, super helpful to us, and thank you so, so much to anyone that's already done that. While you're over there, why not leave us a review as well? Again, you're just helping us out even more, and again, thank you to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Bastion, which I'm going to be moving on to immediately after The Last of Us Part 2, because Ghost of Tsushima is out soon, and I know we'll be moving on to that. Well, alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.